We're going to talk briefly about what's called cropping to size. So we worked on this in our last tutorial set, brought the puppy into the image, and maybe you want to use this image for a project. So for example, if I was working on a flyer and I wanted this to be the front of the flyer, maybe the feature image on the front, I need to, of course, know what size that flyer is going to be. So we have our Illustrator document that is a 4x6, and that 4x6 is the paper area, and then we have the bleed on the outside. So that bleed is 1/8 of an inch. So if I wanted to make this image that I've set up, if I want to make that the full feature image of the front of the flyer, for example, what I need to do is crop to size. I need to make sure that this from Photoshop is coming in at the correct size and the correct resolution. So we looked previously at our image size and how we assess an image, and this image is currently at 14.5 by 18, roughly at 72 dpi. So first of all, we have to remember that print resolution is 300. So I just want to make sure, what is this going to allow me at 300? So 3.5, not ideal. I'm going to have to sample this up, which I shouldn't do, but I'm going to do it for the sake of the tutorial. And sampling up means that I'm going to be asking it to add information, add data that it doesn't have. It's going to be adding pixels, so it needs to fill those pixels with something, so it's going to be guessing at the resolution. So again, that's not something we want to do for a proper production piece. I'm going to do it for the tutorial here, but we always want to have an image that is much higher in resolution so that we can go down in resolution, never always take away. We never want to add, we always want to remove information. We always want to have an image larger and higher in resolution than we need. So what I'm going to do is first make sure I know what size I need. The way I'm going to do that, I know because I've done this a fair bit, but when you're learning this stuff, there's just a couple things you can do to make it a little easier on yourselves. Now remember, you do want to have your rulers on, so Command R will bring the rulers up, or you can go to the View menu and bring the rulers up. Command R, and then we have again a 4x6, but for a full feature image we need to include the bleed. So our image size is going to be 4x6. So it's actually going to be 4.25 by 6.25. And where that quarter comes from on each dimension is the bleed, 1/8 of an inch here, 1/8 of an inch here on the width, and then the same for the height. So I'm just going to make a square, or use the square tool, the rectangle tool, and I'm going to make a size that goes from the bleed guide to the bleed guide, and you'll see there's the dimensions. So we know that if we want our image to cover the full front of this flyer, that it has to match the dimensions from bleed guide to bleed guide, and that is 6.25 by 4.25. Remembering that the bleed, when we were to send this to print, this area that is bleeding would get trimmed off. And if we go to presentation mode, there's no key command for it, but if you go view and presentation mode, that can actually show you, if we had things that would indicate where our bleed guides were, we would be able to see where that cutoff would happen. I'll just press escape to go back. Okay, so we know we need a 6.25 by 4.25. Now in Photoshop, to crop to size, we're using the crop tool, and when we click on that, we get up here some fields. So this first one is telling us how we're going to crop. Are we cropping by a designated width, height, and resolution? Or are we cropping by a ratio, maybe a square? Do we have presets and so on? So ratio is kind of the the base one, and if you click clear, you can just do your own. You're kind of freehanding the crop. We're going to do the specific size that we need. So we're going to go to width, height, resolution. We're doing a 4x6, or in this case, because it's landscape, we're doing a 6x4. And we need to include our bleed in this image. So we're going to do 6.25. And 4.25, and print resolution is 300, so we're going to do 300. But one thing you want to make sure of before you insert the resolution here is that you have pixels per inch selected and not pixels per centimeter. Pixels per centimeter will actually come out at roughly half. It would be twice as what you would need, unless you switched after, and then it would be more than you need. So you just have to be careful that you make sure you've first selected pixels per inch and then go to 300. Okay, so because a centimeter is basically half an inch, a little less. So we have width, height, resolution field selected with our crop tool. 6 1/4, remembering that there's an 1/8 of an inch bleed on each side that we're accounting for, by 4 1/4, and 300 DPI. And you may have noticed that this crop frame is changing according with the settings that we're doing. Now you can go into your image and you can move your image to adjust to the crop frame, or you can work with the crop frame, but it's going to stay proportional to what you've done. Now I'm sampling up. I'm again doing what I shouldn't be doing, and I'm adding data by increasing the resolution here, but that's going to make sure that it's the correct resolution, but I don't want to go smaller because then I'm really asking it to add too much. So I'm just going to keep the crop as large as I can on this image, and then I'll move the image into place. Now I'm not going to worry about this artwork up here. I'll show you how I might get rid of that quickly. Okay, so let's say I cropped it there. Then I'll hit the check mark up here, and that will now make our image size 6 1/4 by 4 1/4 at 300 DPI. Okay, now before I place this into Illustrator, I know it's the correct size, but I'm going to just add a little bonus in here. If I wanted to get rid of that banner, it's on a pretty clear wall. There isn't really a texture. There's some variances in the tone of the image, in the lighting and so on, but I can probably get rid of that pretty quickly. There's a few things I can do, but one thing I want to show you that you may find handy is the clone stamp. So this over here, and what this allows me to do is use a brush. It utilizes the brush tool in Photoshop to clone something out, to hide something, and not even hide it, you're pretty much deleting it, but you're covering it up with a sample of some other aspect of the image. So I'll click on that, and then if you hold it down, there's the pattern stamp tool. For now, just work with the clone stamp, and you can see this circle that it brings up. That's the brush at a size of 35 pixels right now. Now if you're seeing this, that means you have your cap locks on. If it's showing the crosshairs and not the circular brush, you probably have caps lock on, and I just want to turn that off. And then I can increase the brush size up here, or I can use my square bracket. So I'm just going to increase it a bit. Then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to sample an area. So I'm going to hold my Option key down, click, and I just sampled that part of the image. So I'll make sure I'm on my correct layer here because I have multiple layers. So I'm going to go onto the background layer. Now you can see this background layer is locked, so I'll just double click that to make sure it's unlocked. And I'll sample again. So I'll go back to make sure I'm on my clone stamp, option click to sample, and now it's going to show me what it sampled. So earlier I sampled, I was on another layer. So you got to make sure you're on the layer you want to be sampling from. Option click, and then I'll just go up here. And now one thing, you don't want to do too much following. Like if I click here, you don't want to just keep going like that and brushing up. Eventually you're going to hit what you're sampling. See how it's adding in what I'm trying to cover up. So I'm going to be a little more random about it. And sometimes you have to just click and brush and click and brush, and then I can go down here, get a little more space. Takes some getting used to, but once you see how it works, it's very useful. And what I'm essentially trying to do here is avoid any patterning. This is a good area. It's quite clean. There's no patterns, no textures, no marks on the wall and so on, so I can get a pretty clean sample. And that just lets me fill it in. Now, if you find that it's doing something funny, like it's not filling in entirely, you may have to check your opacity, the opacity of the brush, so it's not putting down 100% fill. Sometimes the flow. So these things, the more you use this tool, you start to understand how these work. But option click is just a way to get rid of something quickly, but the more you use it, you will find that it has little variances that you just have to get used to. And I always find I'm just option clicking quite a bit just to make sure I'm not getting something I don't want. Okay, so that's just a little side lesson with the clone stamp, but we've cropped to size. I cleaned that up a bit, and I'm going to save this. So I'll save as, so that I don't overwrite anything, I'll save it as just front image, and I'll save it as a PSD. If you're not saving as a PSD, another file to save for print is a TIFF. So what you're trying to do when you're saving for print is make sure that you have a high quality file. A TIFF file is a high quality print file. A JPEG is not, nor is a PNG. So JPEG and PNG should not be used for print. TIFF or PSD or Photoshop EPS are what you should be using for print. Everything else, consider it screen only. Okay, so I'm just going to keep this as a Photoshop document, a PSD. And then when I go into Illustrator, if I did everything correctly, when I go to File and Place, and choose Front Image, it will fit from bleed guide to bleed guide. Okay, there we go. So same as InDesign, when you're bringing an image in, you go File, Place, and it fits from bleed guide to bleed guide. So we'll see again with the presentation mode, there's some plants showing here, the corner of the pillow. So in presentation mode, that'll should show those gone, and that we know is where our bleed would get trimmed away. Okay, so there's our image without the bleed.